Full disclosure, the voice you are listening to now is artificially generated, brought to you by satisphonic.com. See the link in the description for more details. What criminal committed an almost perfect crime, and what was the thing that messed it up? Salim Kara, who single-handedly stole 2.3 million in coins one by one. He kept a low profile for 13 years, but blew it by buying a $1 million house in the early 90s. Hups, UW 90s. Hups, UW, Lofriel Lunch, Company of Bloxalim Kara, Al-Rut, Scam. That's a pretty great read. Love the tidbit at the end. Before his sentencing in March 1996, Kara made an enigmatic statement in court, promising at some point to share his side of this fascinating tale. Remember, every coin has two sides. The Dunbar armored robbery. The largest cashist in its history, a 6-man inside job to rob an armored cash depot. They set up a house party as an alibi, used the keys to get into the cafeteria, and waited in there until all employees came in on break, then ambushed and subdued them without firing a shot or raising an alarm. They then loaded the money bags with over $18 million into a U-Haul, destroyed the cut TV tapes, and returned to the party. Then they sat on the money for 6 months before hiring a crooked lawyer to set up a real estate money laundering scheme to avoid suspicion. 2 years after the robbery, one of the men paid a real estate broker with a stack of money still wrapped in the original currency scrap. The broker immediately reported it to the police. After being arrested, he cracked under interrogation, confessed to the robbery, and ratted out his partner's edit. All the men have since finished their prison sentences, and most of the money was never found, so there's a chance they still won in the end. That's an incredibly stupid way to get caught. It is, but it's also not that surprising. Most of us do really stupid things, at least occasionally. These 6 guys would have to make it their entire lives without any one of them doing anything really stupid. Leaving the "this was stolen" directly from a bank vault sticker on your stolen cash is a pretty easy one to avoid, though. Sen Menendez left bribe money in the envelope and just left it in his closet. He also accepted clearly identifiable, serialized gold bars that just happened to be stolen. He didn't know that, but that's irrelevant. You melt them down, Fs. Melting them down and recasting them down and recasting them would have made them practical and traceable. Gold is gold, and there are plenty of places that would pay you cash for it. This is not rocket science. I'm providing these links as examples. All these products can be purchased elsewhere over the counter for cash if one wants to. Tapsir, Amazon Comelting, Ceramic Crucible, Silver, Coppered, 7-Skixlen, Focal Taps, W Amazon, Combs, Graphite, Tigraphite, Teening Gemold Hots, W Amazon and Compensomatic Cylinder, Performance, 9, ETS 4000, Beta Robin 3, Atzdoblum Toms, Quelding Gloves Hatips, W Amazon, Combs, 20, Muller Team Baraxed Powder Hot Clips, U2, Bow Sightfook Sobcow. T2 by Sightfook Sobcow. T568 when selling gold. Jewelers, for example, prefer that you pour the molten gold into a stock pot of clean, cold water that produces drops, strings, beads, and swirls of gold in various sizes that can be cut up and measured in smaller, exact amounts which are easier to sell. An ingot is more of a take-it-or-leave-it proposition, and some people may not have the cash on hand to buy that amount. Larger crucibles and molds are available for larger quantities if that's the way someone wants to go. This is just an example of how to do it. Man, you must have hated the Italian Job, 2003. All that hustle to launder those distinctive gold bars with a dancer on them. Criminals have to be smart and lucky all the time, while the police need to be smart and lucky once. John George High killed up to 6 people between 1944 and 1949 by either clubbing or shooting his victims, and then disposed of their bodies by dissolving them in concentrated sulfuric acid. He would then fraudulently sell their assets, properties, etc., and pocket the cash. His workshop contained no drainage, so he simply poured the remains on a pile of rubble. His last victim, an elderly victim, disappeared, and 2 days later he accompanied the victim's friend to the police station, where police discovered his history of fraud. At his workshop, the police found papers concerning his earlier victims and dry cleaning, jewelry tickets for his last victim. A pathologist, examining the human remains, found parts of a pelvis, gallstones and dentures on the rubble. High then claimed he had killed his last victim, destroying the body in acid, and completely misunderstanding the legal term of corpus delicti, claimed that he could not be charged as there was no body to determine a crime had taken place. The man went to the gallows. Edit. High came from a particularly devout Plymouth Brethren background and frequently had vampiric dreams of being offered blood to drink. In his police interview, he tried to plead insanity in the hope that he would be sent to Broadmoor, asylum prison, but of course that fell through. A draft dodger, High spent much of what or two in prison for crimes related to fraud and embezzlement. In jail, he experimented dissolving dead mice in sulfuric acid, stolen from the prison workshop. People he killed, the McSwan family. The senior McSwan was his employer. He murdered the son, then claimed that he had fled to Scotland to escape being called up for the army. As the war was coming to an end, the McSwans wondered why their son wasn't coming home, so in luring Mr. McSwan into his basement flat workshop, bludgeoned him to death, then sat him up in a chair before luring Mrs. McSwan and doing likewise. The Henderson couple, Mr. Henderson, a formed army medic and private doctor, High befriended this couple, whom had just moved into the area. At a housewarming party, in which High played piano, he stole Henderson's service revolver, which he used to shoot the Hendersons with some time later. After murdering the Hendersons, he stopped at a cafe and had a brunch of poached eggs on toast and tea, before finishing off the job. Mrs. Durand, Deacon, a wealthy, long-time resident widow that resided in the Onslow Court Hotel in Kensington, London, where High also resided. In all of these murders, he would strip the bodies and possessions of jewels, fur coats, etc., and take life insurance and conveyancing papers with him, which he would cash in on. He also claimed to have drank a pint of blood from his victims, but that is likely his insanity plea. I love how, according to this guy's logic, dropping someone into acid while they're still alive or burning them to death would have been unimpeachable crimes due to the legal system supposedly having no concept of object permanent. Did he just think that the police sat around wringing their hands, someone committed arson because there was no longer a house? He also accepted clearly identifiable, serialized gold bars that just happened to be stolen. He didn't know that, but that's irrelevant. You melt them down, Epps. Melting them down and recasting them down, and recasting them would have made them practically untraceable. Gold is gold, and there are plenty of places that will pay you cash for it. This is not rocket science. I am providing these links as examples. All these products can be purchased elsewhere, over the counter for cash, if one wants to. Teps, Lumazon, Comeltine, ceramic crucible, silver, coppert of 7 Slixton, 400 teps, Dornio, Amazon combs, comes of graphite, Ingevolt haps, Wamaznas kick cylinder, pump enzymatic cylinder, performance, Minet, 4000, dubs the Robbenfried 8 haps, U Amazon comes, welding gloves hot tips, UBO Amazon, comms, 20 Mulete Barracks, Tabarai cups, U2, BT Fox Opcow, to 568 when selling gold. Jewelers, for example, prefer that you pour the molten gold into a stockpot of clean, cold water that produces drops, strings, beads, and swirls of gold in various sizes that can be cut up and measured in smaller, exact amounts which are easier to sell. An ingot is more of a take-it-or-leave-it proposition, and some people may not have the cash on hand to buy that amount. Larger crucibles and molds are available for larger quantities if that's the way someone wants to go. This is just an example of how to do it. That one dude who robbed a bank by hiring a bunch of people from Craigslist to show up wearing the same outfit he was and wait outside. He would gotten away, but a homeless man saw him do a practice run the day before and after the robbery, told the police. DB Tuber was the name the press gave him, as he escaped on an inner tube down a creek. Anthony Kersey is his name, and he wrote a book that was very interesting. He planned his robbery for months. He planned to use pepper spray to subdue one of the guards, and to convince himself it would work, he pepper sprayed himself. He also moved boulders out of the creek for months before to make sure his escape path was clear. Edit. It is spelled Anthony Curcio, as was pointing out to me. Also, he robbed an armored car, not a bank. His book is called Heist and High. Tubing down a river seems like a terrible getaway plan. You couldn't possibly think of a more predictable mode of transportation. Lol. How will we catch him? Be at this bridge in 17 minutes. He wasn't just floating. He rigged a cable system and pulled himself upstream a few hundred yards before crossing the creek and exiting. The Antwerp Diamond Heist, the perfect heist. of the century where an Italian gang stole 100 million in gems. While leaving Antwerp, they disposed of the disguises and the tools used, but one member of the gang was too lazy to burn everything as instructed. Among the rubbish, the police found envelopes of the Antwerp Diamond Centre and a receipt for a sandwich bought at a store close to the centre. They recovered video footage of the sandwich store and busted the mastermind of the heist, who didn't give up his mates, but some were later identified. Some of the stolen diamonds are still unaccounted for. Ooh, group projects. If there's one thing I've learned reading this thread, is that if I'm ever to commit murders or robberies, I should make myself a sandwich at home if I want to get lunch. Buying a sandwich always gets you caught. Predictable route, but the fuck would think a bank robber is using a tube for a getaway. Wolfgang Beltracchi, he made millions with forged paintings he painted all himself. He was ultimately caught because he once accidentally used paint that contained a very slight amount of a substance that wasn't used in the days of the original painter. If you're going to deceive people using forged artwork, at least go the route of Hans van Meegeren, trading them to Screw with Hermann Göring. But he was found a similar way. A substance that was a major component of his paint mixtures was a 20th century invention. Van Meegeren's court case account is rather funny and interesting to me. It was found that he had sold a few of his forgeries to the Nazis, and was subsequently court-martialed after the war for colluding with the Nazis by apparently selling genuine veneers to them. Ended up proving his innocence by painting a good forgery right there in the courtroom. Robert Durst. He was caught while being interviewed for an HBO series, to which he initially agreed on to clear his name. Went to bathroom and mumbled to microphone, which he thought was off. What the hell did I do? Kill all of them, of course. This was later presented to the court as evidence. You can still watch it on Abu. Honestly, one of the most shocking moments in a documentary. It's crazy. Also watching him freak out when he comments that the word Beverly is spelled wrong and the interviewer compares the killer's exact same writing spelling to something of Durst's. It's crazy. That Australian kid who hacked the FBI and put his photos on their website. He scrubbed the metadata from the photo so it wouldn't show the GP's location. Then he accidentally uploaded the original with that information still on it. That crime, Kinder, sounds like it should barely be a crime, or at least turn into a job offer. Assuming he only hacked the site to prove he could and wasn't trying to get in the way of B investigations, I'm guessing a kid who could hack their site shows great promise. Though being Australian, he couldn't actually work for them. I worked in the federal prison system, met a man in his mid-30s who was serving time for a series of bank robberies. His arrest was a complete surprise in his area, model citizen, married young kids, volunteered and gave generously to his kids' school. His bank robberies were intricately planned and well-timed. One of his underlings decided to open up his own bank robbing business. He wasn't as smart and ratted out our man when he was caught, as part of his plea deal. Knightsbridge robbery. The boss of the gang cut himself while breaking into the lockboxes and in the dark. Found out too late, there was blood all around the place. Too much to clean up. He nevertheless managed to get away with $60 and hide somewhere in South America, but at some point decided to go back to England to retrieve his Ferrari, being arrested in the process. I knew a guy who got into selling drugs on the dark web. He had this setup where he'd buy the drugs and package them in his room, ship them through USPs, and collect money through cryptocurrency. He made a lot of money, went on for a while without being caught. They even found fictionalized accounts he wrote about how he was able to do this, including driving 50 miles to make drop. He was caught when an employee noticed he was handling large numbers of small envelopes while wearing latex gloves and reported it. He probably would have gotten away with it if he'd worn winter gloves over the latex. Shit, that's a good tip. Thanks. The guy who created the Silk Road gave himself away by initially introducing the Silk Road to the world from an email address that would ultimately lead investigators right to him. Watch the documentary on this. It was absolutely fascinating. I think logging into his laptop, his public place, was his mistake, because even if he would have gotten caught, there was no way, at least very hard, to put him behind bars without he logging into his laptop and giving it to investigators. Yeah, he got caught because he used the Wi-Fi at a local library. A male and female FBI agent pretended to be a married couple having an intense argument. When he looked up from his laptop at them, the man tackled him and the woman grabbed the laptop before he could shut it. There's the story of Daniel Rigmaiden. He was a scam artist who defrauded the government out of hundreds of thousands in tax money. He was eventually caught, but was so confident that his methods of avoiding capture were thorough that he thought law enforcement had to have been cheating, in some way abusing power. When caught, he turned whistleblower. This kid was smart. Per documentary Imbeb, he evades the FBI for months. Once captured, he uses his time, then in prison, to investigate. His obsessive search for the truth leads to a groundbreaking discovery. Law enforcement used a secret technology called a stingray to intercept his phone calls and personal information, as well as those of millions of unsuspecting Americans. He takes his discovery public, and the revelation not only carries implications for his case, but also for the fate of the Fourth Amendment. The stingrays are cell site simulators, or IMSI catchers, invasive cell phone surveillance devices that mimic cell phone towers and send out signals to trick cell phones in the area into transmitting their locations and identifying information. When used to track a suspect's cell phone, they also gather information about the phones of countless bystanders who happen to be nearby, as a law enforcement can literally drive down any block with one turned on, having it connect to every single mobile device as it moves down the street. Mobile cell towers essentially gathering your information without your knowledge. And this is still legal for cops, I think. I think it was Deep Web on Netflix. I can't confirm from my phone, though. Someone robbed a bank a few minutes from my house and fled on a bicycle. He was in and out quickly enough that cops weren't on the scene until he had ditched the bike in the neighborhood. He had concealed his identity enough during the robbery that all the police had to go on is a male riding a bicycle, carrying a parcel in the vicinity of this neighborhood. He had made it to a truck he had parked in the neighborhood without being noticed by anyone. The police had little idea what to look for, and by all measure, he had made the perfect getaway. All he had to do was drive home. While attempting to leave the neighborhood in his truck, he saw a police vehicle making a patrol, and in a panic, he drove his truck straight into a utility pole. The patrolling officer saw this, went to check on him, and found the stolen money in his truck. In 1995, Mark Wing of Springfield wanted to kill his wife, Donna, so he could carry on an affair, and the perfect scenario came. A week before her death, Roger Harrington was her shuttle driver on the way home from the Steely airport, and he reportedly spoke about always getting high and having orgies. In turn, the Wingers complained to the shuttle company. Then, Mark calls the police claiming that he shot Roger after he caught him attacking Donna. Despite the contradiction of Roger being shot in a way that Mark did not claim happened, the case was shut and Mark was viewed as a hero for killing the man who killed his wife. However, in his infinite wisdom, Mark wouldn't stop asking the police about the case, despite it being ruled as closed. Also, he tried to sue the shuttle company for Roger's alleged action, to which the company started their own investigation, which showed that the events couldn't have gone the way Mark described. The final nail came when his affair partner came forward to the police and described their affair, which led to further re-examination of evidence that showed it was staged. Mark was later tried and convicted in 2002 and sentenced to life without parole. In another derp moment from Mark, he was later given an extra 35 years for trying to solicit the murder of his affair partner and his rich friend, who refused to bail him out from behind bars. The main piece of evidence being a 19-page handwritten plan for how he wanted the murders to be carried out. The serial arsonist that caused like 90% of La County's fire. He worked for the fire dept. One of his fires were ruled as an accidental electrical fire, and he insisted it wasn't. The Friday night bank robber was the most prolific bank robber in US history. I believe he had a master's degree in something analytical like math, was a martial arts instructor. He figured out there's a time of the year in the Northeast where it would be dark out, just before the banks closed. He used motorcycles to drive through the woods to these banks and rode it back through the woods to a U-Haul truck he had waiting, and would put the bike into the truck and drive away calmly. He did this for a long time, kind of like the robbers in the movie Point Break. He would stop for the rest of the year, which had the police really guessing. They couldn't figure out patterns for a long time. Years later, the police started to catch on with his idea of doing it on Friday nights in the Northeast, and from video knew he was probably into martial arts. But that doesn't exactly narrow it down. dumb luck, some random kids stumbled upon his buried cache of things like a gun, gloves, mask, cash, etc. in the woods. They turned it over to the cops, and that's how they ended up finding out who he was. The FBI gave him some deal where he worked with them and banks on telling them how to prevent bank robberies. From video, knew he was probably into martial arts. I earned this black belt, and I ain't taking it off, ever. I just imagined he was kicking and punching the air. Ariel Castro gained international attention for abducting, brutalizing, and keeping 3 girls in his house for over 11 years. This was before he forgot the door unlocked one time when he left the house, and Amanda Berry was finally able to run out and use a stranger's phone to dial 911. That's quite a bad enough story, and I could have easily stopped there and still had one of the most disturbing posts on this submission. But the investigation also found that his next-door neighbor had abducted a girl back in the early 90s, and he still had her remains buried in his basement. He might have never been caught, and that girl would have still been a missing person cold case if Amanda Berry was never able to make that phone call. Wait, what I never heard about the neighbor? Please tell me there's a movie about this. Harold Shipman, seemingly a normal Jeep, turns out to be a prolific serial killer with maybe up to 250 victims over his career. Only discovered when a hospital worker was concerned about the number of cremation forms they had to process for his elderly patients, so very close to going undetected. Damn, he had to be killing a lot of people for the amount of dying elderly people to be suspicious. I thought it was because he was changing their wills to make him the beneficiary and a relative cottoned on. You're both right. A doctor became suspicious in the number of cremation certificates, but police were unable to find sufficient evidence. After the investigation closed, Shipman killed 3 more people. The final nail in the coffin, so to speak, is what you are speaking of, where he tried to make himself the sole beneficiary of a former mayor. So it was the will manipulation that got him caught, but he was under suspicion beforehand with the cremation certificate. The Indiana fertility specialist who was using his own sperm to fertilize the eggs of his patients in the 1980s. He was part of the Quiverful cult and fathered a confirmed 94 children in his home area, but it's estimated there could be over 200 half-siblings. He was found out decades later when one of his patients' children took a DNA test and found 7 half-siblings matches. He absolutely would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those meddling kids. Teps, time, $6,176,300 a year. Father, true story. Probably the DC snipers. They couldn't convince the police to talk to them because they were swamped with fake callers, so the snipers told them to look into a murder in another state. This started the chain of events to them being found out, but before that the police had nothing. The public was absolutely terrified, and the police had no clue who was responsible. The You're Wrong About podcast did a fantastic job telling this story. The DC sniper story is one of those things that has kind of been forgotten about, but it was absolutely insane when it happened. I remember them telling people to constantly move their head around while pumping gas. I remember how people were on the lookout for a white van for days, weeks, and then it turned out to be a dark-colored car where they hid in the trunk. Joseph James D'Angelo, otherwise known as the Golden State Killer, the East Area Rapist, and the Visalia Ransacker. The guy was a one-man crime wave. In a 12-year period, he committed at least 30 murders, 51 rapes, and 120 burglaries. As the East Area Rapist, he would often select his targets months in advance, conduct extensive reconnaissance, learning the routines of the occupants, and sometimes break in advance of his attack to plant his weapons and ligatures, and he would make threatening, hang-up calls in advance to create a sense of fear. I won't go into details about his attacks, but he had a whole routine and everything that he would go through. And even though the sketches of him were near enough accurate, and the criminal profile of him was dead on accurate, for example, they correctly identified the attacker as working or having worked in law enforcement and the military, and JJ was a police officer at the time of his crime spree. They never even came close to finding him. When he was arrested, it was the first time he had ever come to the attention of the police. He didn't even have any DNA on file for them to match when that became a thing. That was how good he was at staying off the radar. The reason he got caught, genealogical testing. You know those test kits that people get from services such as 23andMe and Ancestry? Well, the police ran the DNA samples through a database used by those services and identified his relatives. They eventually found someone closely related enough to him that they could identify him. So he hadn't even submitted his DNA for testing. One of his relatives did. The guy must have been so fucking shocked when the police showed up at his door. Israel Keyes is almost certainly the smartest serial killer that has been caught. He studied past serial killers and how they were caught, and so Keyes targeted random people all across the United States to avoid detection with months of planning before he committed a particular crime. He specifically went for campgrounds and isolated locations. He claimed to only use guns when he had to and preferred strangulation. Keyes planned murders long ahead of time and took extraordinary action to avoid detection. Unlike most serial killers, he did not have a victim profile, saying he chose a victim randomly. On his murder trips, he kept his mobile phone turned off and paid for items with cash. He had no connection to any of his known victims. For the Currier murders, Keyes flew to Chicago, where he rented a car to drive 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers, to Vermont. He then used the murder kit he had hidden 2 years earlier to perform the murders. He was only caught because he kidnapped a girl and tried to get ransom money from her parents, and law enforcement tracked him down via withdrawals from her bank account and the car he was seen abducting her in on security camera. The FBI does not even know how many people he killed, so who knows how long he could have kept it up if he had chosen to continue his usual killing. The scariest part about these stories is you don't know who the best serial killers are. You see so many people who got caught over something stupid, which tells me that there are many people who didn't do something stupid to get themselves caught, especially medical workers. There are so many ways to make it look like someone just let go of life. Dr. Harold Shipman, for instance, is known to have killed 218. It's suspected to be more than 250. Very notorious and led to changes to the medical systems in Britain. Perhaps the largest change was the movement from single Doctor General practices to multiple Doctor General practices to multiple Doctor General practices. This was not a direct recommendation, but rather because the report stated that there was not enough safeguarding and monitoring of doctors' decisions. We still have no idea how many people Bob Durst killed. Durst traveled all over the country, often living in homeless shelters, dressing as a woman, pretending to be deaf, mute. The first disappearance we know of that occurred near Durst was in 1971, when a local teen in Vermont went missing after having shopped at Durst's natural food vitamin store. 1971. He wasn't arrested on a murder charge that stuck until 2021. He was acquitted of Morris Black's murder and never convicted of his wife's murder. Think of how many people he may have killed. He had millions and millions of dollars. He had millions and millions of dollars. His family knew he was a dog killer and that he killed his first wife, and they protected him. Dennis Rader, Butke, only got caught because he decided to start toying with the cops. He hadn't killed anybody in years. Oh, I have an interesting story about him. I bartended at a place in Anchorage. I would be the last one to leave every night. The parking lot in the back was huge as the building my bar was in was also an office building. One night, a white pickup truck was parked 10 spaces away from mine in an empty parking lot, and a dude was sitting in it. He looked at me and just stared. Not weird, I just kind of noticed it and left for the night. That truck and the dude were there every night for 2 weeks. After the first few days, I started getting weird vibes from it and started asking my dishwasher to walk me out at the end of the night in exchange for a couple beers after work. One night, the truck just stopped showing up. The next day, he's arrested for killing a girl he kidnapped from a coffee shop down the road from my bar. It turned out that he lived on the street behind me at the time, and the truck they put on the news was the truck in the parking lot, and the weird dude in the truck looked remarkably similar to Keyes. Shit scares me to this day. It scares me to this day. Ita not the next day. I should have said shortly after. Christian Bala killed a man and got away with it, only to write a fictional book going into detail of what he did, and sales of said book went up after he was convicted. Edited. Welp, I didn't expect this to be my most upvoted comment, but I'll allow it. Willie Sutton was one of the greatest bank robbers and never hurt anyone. He was caught when his car broke down and he bought a sandwich and was recognized. North Hollywood robbers would have gotten in and out if they hadn't walked in as a cop car was passing. They were well outfitted and already had a few robberies under their belt. Watching that footage, it's insane that the only fatalities were the perpetrators. Granted, there were long-term and traumatic injuries, but given the hundreds of rounds fired, there could have been dozens of fatalities. The real answer is that there are many perfect crimes, in the sense that no one is ever arrested for having committed them. In 1969, Ted Conrad walked out of a bank in Cleveland with $215,000 in cash, equivalent to $1,700,000 in 2021, and was never caught. He lived his life as a free person in Boston before confessing to his family just before he died. But Ewan McHugh's conduces news initiative, who pulled one of Cleveland's biggest bank heists, identified 1,283,883,850. Al Capone was doing all the crimes, and it's the tax evasion that got him. I worked as a tax preparer for a bit, had multiple drug dealers and prostitutes come in who didn't want to be Capone. Would love to hear more about this. Do they just put prostitute or drug dealer in the occupation field? Do they itemize their deductions? You don't have to tell the IRS where the money comes from. It's just other taxable income, and it's not necessarily illegal means. It could be from consulting or contracting or something. Loeb and Leopold, two high IQ teenagers in Chicago in the 1920s, committed a murder just because they thought they were too clever to be caught. One of them lost a lens from his glasses where they dropped the body. Very rare rocks that led the police right to them. Susan Smith, the one who drowned her kids in her car, she claimed it was a carjacking by a black man. No weapon or witnesses. The cops had nothing but her word. It was a simple traffic light that got her. She claimed that her light was red and there were no other cars at the light. That couldn't be true with a controlled signal. If there was no cross traffic, her light would not have been red. Guy Fawkesman wanted to boom British Parliament House during a party celebration to maximize targets. For this plot, he included somebody who had a relative attending the party. This man told his relative, "Yo fam, we gonna blow this shit sky high. Don't come to school." This led to authorities foiling the plot. The Oklahoma City Bombing Museum is fascinating and talks about how they were at a dead end essentially, but Timothy McVeigh screwed up just one time and used his real name instead of alias when ordering Chinese food one night and left the receipt in the hotel room where they were able to see a mismatch between the ordered name and hotel reservation name. The Wet Bandits' solid research on the target property. Good plan. Should have been a textbook job, foiled by inept parenting. You need to read about the serial killer book, Bind, Torture, Kill. How he got caught was stupidity and lack of understanding of technology. For those not interested in looking it up, Boot had a history of communicating with the police by writing letters. In 2005, he asked the police if a floppy disk could be traced at all. Cops, of course, said no. So Buck sent a floppy disk with his writings, and police found metadata from a deleted Word file from his church that was last edited by Dennis. Edit to add more context. Raiders' killings happened between 1974 and 1974. So he evaded capture for decades before sending his floppy disk in.